Less than a quarter of a mile to go in the Holy Bull. 'Tis the Law sets sail under Manny Franco and moves to a 3-length lead. Ete Indian is back to second, well clear of Toledo Turf in third with an eighth of a mile left to go. 'Tis the Law shifting ground to touch. He's down toward the inner rail, but he's in front. Ete Indian is game, but he's only second best to Sakatoga Stables. 'Tis the Law, your Holy Bull winner.
All right, welcome back to Racing Rundown. In the midst of a world crisis, it seems like the world's basically on fire at this point, but we still have horse racing, so that's a good sight. This weekend we will be covering, as you can tell by the title of this, looking at the Florida Derby, and joining me on the program today is Acacia Courtney, Gulfstream Park handicapper, as well as fellow Connecticut resident. So thanks for coming on the program today, Acacia.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I always love whenever we can, as much fun as it is for myself and Eric to babble about some of these races, I always love whenever I can bring other people on the show. So, but before we get to the Florida Derby, I just want to touch a little bit on the Gulfstream Park Oaks. And the one obvious horse in this race is Tonalist Shape, the Safi Joseph train horse. But another horse that looks to come back off of a subpar effort. That's kind of what I would describe it last time, is Lake Avenue, Bill Mott trained horse. She, going back to December of 2019, she won the Demoiselle, and then last start out was fourth in the Busher. I know with myself, I would expect to see a better effort from her out there. I don't know what you would say about that, Acacia. Would you say that's a fair point to make with her?
I do. I think that she was also coming off of a bit of a layoff. She was coming back at a mile after not having run for 3 months, and I know that she did break her maiden going 7/8, but I think that she's actually the type of filly that's better around 2 turns, just even looking at her pedigree and that typical kind of Godolphin pedigree that you're pretty used to seeing. And her Demoiselle win was very impressive, and she has speed, which is going to be really beneficial for her on this Gulfstream Park racetrack. So I like her getting the chance to go a mile and a 16th now. A starting gate will break right in front of the winner's circle, and when it's a mile and a 16th at Gulfstream, the way that the track is made up makes it a first finish line race. So you're going to have a shorter stretch run than you ordinarily would in typical dirt race at Gulfstream. So that's why her speed is going to be a really potent weapon, and she's now second off the layoff. Joel Rosario's been in town at Gulfstream since Sunday, has had a couple of wins, so I think he's going to suit her well in being able to use her speed. And she's going to have to run a better race than she did last time. She's got some really nice horses to run again today.
All right, so that's the point. Would you say, I know myself and Eric, my co-host, we were talking about this race before we record our actual show later today, talking about Tonalist Shape. She's a really talented horse, but he described her as beatable. Would you agree with that Tonalist Shape is beatable, even though she does have a lot of talent?
Absolutely. I thought she was beatable last time, and look, I've been tough on her. She's undefeated in 5 starts. She's won 2 graded stakes. She's handled everything that's been thrown at her. So she's really proved all of her doubters wrong, and I admit that I certainly was one of them. In the forward gal, I thought that she had ability. I didn't think it was the toughest field. It was a small field as well. The race, from a time perspective as well, for the distance and the level, was actually pretty slow, and she got a pretty low by her speed figure for it. She's just got a 70 for a grade 3 win. But then she came back in the Devonadale, beat the very hyped and expensive Spice is Nice, who's also in this field. That race, she really proved that she deserves to be a big player in this division. So I think that she has done nothing wrong as of yet, and I mean, look, credit to her. She's the horse that's always going to be one that people will try to take a stand against because of that slow race. She's got to go 2 turns for the first time, but she's done absolutely nothing wrong as of yet. And I mentioned Spice is Nice, who was the big favorite in the Devonadale, and I was covering the races, obviously, on Fountain of Youth Day, and hearing from John Velasquez, who rode Spice is Nice that day. And I do think it's interesting, for what it's worth, that Johnny's going to actually be on Todd Pletcher's other runner, Mrs. S, who's the last out maiden winner, and Javier Castellano is going to be on Spice is Nice. They're kind of doing a jockey flip-flop, which is very interesting, but that's another point. But Johnny had said last time that Spice is nice, and she's a very big filly, that she was kind of jumping shadows a little bit late, too, that she was getting really distracted. And let's not forget that was only her second race. She's still an inexperienced filly. She being by Curlin is absolutely going to love getting to go 2 turns.
All right, so that is the that is the Gulfstream Park Oaks. Moving on to the Florida Derby. Obviously there's the 3 big horses in this race. You have Tiz the Law, who a lot of people, including myself, are tapped before the Kentucky Derby got moved. Tapped as one of the early horses that looked like he could win the Kentucky Derby. You also had the horse that finished second to him in the Holy Bull, E.T. Indienne, who, without Tiz the Law and the Fountain of Youth, came into that race and beat a really solid field, including the super hyped up horse Dennis's Moment that we talked with Dale Romans on the show back in December about. And also you have another horse coming into before his start in the Sam Davis at Tampa, was the horse that I thought if the race that he won on New Year's Day, the Jerome, had been run the day earlier, he could have been the 2-year-old champion. Independence Hall. He's not getting as much respect. He's lost a lot of respect off of that loss in the Sam Davis. But we'll get to those 3 in a couple of minutes. But there are some other horses that I'd like to touch on as well, including the duo of Todd Pletcher horses. Anyone who knows anything about the Florida Derby and Todd Pletcher's owned this race, especially over the last 5 years, posting 4 winners in that. First horse of this is Governor Morris, who last start out was a winner of an allowance at Tampa. Going back all the way to his start in October, he ran a very nice second behind a horse, Maxfield, who was superb in that Breeders' Futurity. I'll ask you the question about Governor Morris, seeing him off of that run into the Breeders' Futurity and then getting that win, his second win of his career. Do you think that there's a lot of talent with Governor Morris?
I think he's definitely been a very hyped up horse. I think he's a bit of a wise guy horse as well. I saw him in his first start at Saratoga. It was a surprise, raining that day, and he did win in the slot, but I really think that he kind of cemented himself as a legitimate contender. And I actually think that Maxfield, had he run in the Breeders' Cup, would have been the juvenile champion. He, to me, was one of the most talented 2-year-olds, and from the 2-year-olds that we did get to see by the end of the year last year, in my estimation, it was a relatively weak crop of what we had to go with as it came to Eclipse Award time. So unfortunately, we didn't get to see what I think could have been the best of Maxfield, but I think he's very, very good. Now, Gouverneur Morris last time at Tampa, there was another Todd Pletcher runner in there who had a lot of speed, who ended up stumbling at the start. That left Untitled, who was very fast, for Mark Cassie. Could have potentially have been the lone speed. John Velasquez making a smart move and putting Gouverneur Morris more forwardly placed. He's not typically that kind of runner, but that's the way the race, in a very small field, ended up shaping up. So I thought it was good to see him kind of taken out of his comfort zone. I know that he got some criticism for how hard fought that race had to be, given the fact he was 50 cents at the dollar, but he was taken out of his comfort zone. He wasn't going to be able to come from off of the pace. He wasn't trying to close and make that sweeping run that they had originally planned. He was running with how the race played out. So because of that, I actually thought it was a really game performance from him, and one that made me think he is a horse that has the ability to be a contender in here. Constitution as a sire has just been red hot this year. I mean, you look at him, you look at Tiz the Law, Independence Hall. I mean, the power that this freshman sire has in a race like this is really impressive. I think that's an interesting thread in here as well. So I think that Gouverneur Morris is going to be a bit of the wise guy horse. To me, he's got to do it again in a big field. But again, seeing that he was taken out of his comfort zone last time, that's the biggest takeaway I get from that race.
Now, looking at the other Todd Pletcher horse, Candy Tycoon closed well in the Fountain of Youth to pick up second. Do you see him having the ability to build off of that second place effort in the Fountain of Youth?
I know he's been a bit of a head scratcher for Todd, because you look at how well bet he was in his debut, and Todd, this was probably one of the most highly touted horses at Saratoga. It seems like Todd Pletcher, from word on the street, was getting ready to unleash his next Derby winner type thing. You know, like this was the next Always Dreaming. And it took him a long time to break his maiden. And when he finally did it, he did it well. And then he came back with a second last time. Now, in the Fountain of Youth, he was stuck with the unenviable inside post. Ete Indian was able to clear from the outside and show the speed that he has, and so Candy Tycoon was again taken out of his comfort zone, and he showed that he could close and come from off the pace, which I like as well. And I've said this a lot, and this was an old, for those that follow Maryland racing or have heard of King Leatherberry, this was the thing that he always used to say, that kind of the light bulb clicks when a long-time maiden finally wins. You'll often see them come back and win again or run very well in their subsequent start. And that's what I was kind of expecting from Candy Tycoon. It took him a while to win, but once they finally kind of figured him out and he was able to get the win, it looked to me like he was going to be able to keep that momentum going. So I think that he still has to prove himself as far as being able to kind of be one of these graded stakes winning type horses, but I think he's got a world of talent, and though he's been an enigma, it has to be encouraging to see him now place in a race like the Fountain of Youth.
Looking at one of the other horses in this race, you've got a horse who's run well in his past couple of stakes runs, that being Aja Weed. He was second in the Remsen back in December, a good second behind Shotsky, and then last start out in the Sam Davis, he was a rather disappointing third. Do you think that there's something in him that he could rebound off of a less than desirable effort in the Sam Davis and come back and perform a lot better in the Florida Derby?
He's an interesting one because I think, is the type that just really wants to run all day. And as much as it sounds a bit crazy, I do think a mile and a 16th is a bit short for him. I really think that the mile and an eighth, 2 starts back in the Remsen, was kind of what he wants to do, if not longer. He kind of strikes me as like a Belmont Stakes horse. You know, the type of horse that, yes, you'd have on the Derby trail, but the Belmont would be what you would really be looking forward to. Now, of course, with everything going on in the world right now, this kind of formula of looking ahead to the Belmont, you just don't really know the next time you're going to be able to run or when the Belmont even will be. And I know that the Florida Derby was not the first choice for Kieran to run Aja Weed, but you can't really ship him. It doesn't look like some of the other Kentucky Derby prep races this time of year are going to go. Keep him in his backyard. He's been training at Palm Meadows where Kieran's string is, and as you might know, Kieran McLaughlin retiring as well, and he said he felt like this would kind of be, you know, the right spot for this horse to go, and it would be a good opportunity for Shadwell, who's really supported Kieran in his career all along, to be able to potentially get some more black type or even a win in a race like this for a horse that has ability. I think just they haven't yet gotten to that point in the year where he's going to be able to run those kinds of distance races that he's really going to flourish at. He again strikes me as a Belmont Stakes second second half of the year type horse.
Kind of like a horse that Bill Mott had a few years back, Drosselmeyer, Belmont Stakes winner.
Yep.
Looking at one other horse that is another horse that the Florida Derby was not his first choice. Kelly Breen's As Seen on TV. As Seen on TV ran a really bang-up second to chance it in the Mucho Macho Man. Came back, ran third in the Fountain of Youth. That's not being their first choice with him, but the fact that they are here now, do you see him being able to run similar to that run that he had in the Mucho Macho Man?
I think that this is going to be a big test for him. I had actually liked him last time in the Fountain of Youth because I had some questions about him stretching out even in the Mucho Macho Man, and he showed me going a mile was no problem. And so I had actually thought he was going to get a nice pace setup because he was going to be kind of one of those second flight stalking type of horses, had a good post, could potentially sit a nice trip. Now, it turned out that nobody was going to be catching at say in the end showing the speed last time. So tactically, I thought it was the advantage last time for As Seen on TV. I don't like him going 9 furlongs. I don't think that's his distance. I think a mile, maybe a little bit longer than a mile, is more in his wheelhouse. To me, he still is a little bit more of a one-turn horse, though he ran solidly to finish third in the Fountain of Youth. Again, tactically, I thought he had a nice setup there. I think the 9 furlongs, especially from the inside post, is going to be a little bit of a stretch for him.
Now, looking at, I mentioned at the top of talking about this, the top three horses, ETNEN, Tis the Law, and Independence Hall. I'd like to touch on Independence Hall first. I mentioned his effort last start out in the Sam Davis. Do you feel that he's kind of lost a little bit of respect, a little bit more respect than you would have expected off of that, and that he still has the talent there and can come back and run a lot better than he did in the Sam Davis? That being said, though, he was second in that, so it wasn't like it was a bad performance or anything in that race.
Well, absolutely. You're only as good as your last win. That's the fickle nature of horse racing, and that they remember your last race more than anything. As soon as you get beat, you kind of fall off the pedestal a little bit, and I think that that's what's happened with Independence Hall. One thing I think will be really interesting with him is that he is a handful before the race. I love some of the pictures I saw from the Belmont paddock, of him, or Aqueduct paddock, yes, where he's bucking beforehand, and he's really hard on his handlers to keep settled. He always has cotton in his ears. He's a high energy, aggressive type, as described by Mike Trombetta. And as you know, with everything going on in the world right now with coronavirus concerns, no fans, no crowd, not even owners allowed at Gulfstream Park. It really is a very minimum amount of people that are allowed on the grounds due to safety concerns. That might actually help a horse like Independence Hall, who, like Trombetta said, actually not having a crowd could actually help him be a little bit more settled, a little bit calmer, not get so keyed up. Some horses really react to the crowd a lot. That could actually help Independence Hall quite a bit to kind of keep his energy level settled. Now, last time out in Tampa, he wasn't as keyed up as he had been before some of his prior races, and Sol Volante swept right by him. Now, we'll get a chance to really see just how good he is today, I think, but I think this is actually a very good spot for him, and I do think that he is tremendously talented.
That's kind of the thing I see about Independence Hall. Like you mentioned, the classic example of a horse that loses a race and band jumps off completely. And this is the type of horse that's dangerous in the spot, could come out and have a very strong day on Florida Derby Day. Another horse that has now caught a lot of eyes was ETNEN. He ran a very bang-up second behind Tis the Law in the Holy Bull, and with Tis the Law absent for the Fountain of Youth, he was able to grab the lead early and go with it basically the entire way. Similar to the way that Maximum Security won the Florida Derby last year. Do you see him as the type of horse that could get away on the front end and win a Florida Derby, steal a Florida Derby, kind of like similar to the way Maximum Security was able to do last year?
I don't. I think there's actually going to be a pretty quick pace in here, actually. And I had thought that there was potential to be some pace in the Fountain of Youth, and Florent Giroux did a tremendous job in the Fountain of Youth, clearing and getting a Indian over. If he doesn't have any scratches to his inside, don't forget, even though he was the number 11, he broke from post 10 due to a scratch inside of him, and a scratch outside as well. Today he's got Saturday, I mean, if he doesn't have any scratches to his inside, which anything is possible, but he'll have to go from post 12, and it's even shorter for 9 furlongs kind of going into the first turn. It feels like a really, really short run going into the first turn, and getting early position is so important. So he's going to have a tough time getting over, and one of the things that I think is going to make the difference with the Florida Derby with him, a thing that I really don't like about his running style, and he did it really dramatically last time in the Fountain of Youth, and he's done it before, both in his allowance win and slightly in the Holy Bull, but not as much, is that he drifts pretty generously in the stretch. If you go back and watch the head-on of the Fountain of Youth, you can see, even watching the pan shot, you can see how much he drifts off the rail in the stretch of the Fountain of Youth. Now, he was alone in the stretch of the Fountain of Youth, so it didn't really make that much of a difference. If there's any horse close to him in this stretch in the Florida Derby, say he's on the lead and he has a horse up close or a horse that's closing outside of him, that could get him in trouble with the stewards if he ends up drifting. It also could cause him to leave the rail open for a horse that could potentially come up inside of him. It could cause him to give up ground at any point in the race if he's drifting or getting distracted. And that could cause him to lose some precious ground in the final jumps of the race, and that could kind of leave the door open for anything to happen. So that is a concern that I do have about him. When I spoke to Florent Giroux after the Fountain of Youth, he had said he got distracted by the lights, and that's possible that he did because it was a little bit darker, a little bit later in the day. But he's done it in several races before, so that is one concern I have about Ete Indian.
Now, getting on to the last horse, there's obviously a lot of hype around Tiz the Law, and what rightfully so. In everything except for the Kentucky Jockey Club, he's been really good. Do you think there's a possibility with Tiz the Law, though, that this could be the type of horse that a lot of people might overlook the chance that he could get beat because of the fact that he has been so good in most of his starts?
Absolutely. You have a full field of 12 here. You have some very talented horses. You have graded stakes winners. You have horses on the rise. You never know what can happen in the horse race, and that's one of the most fun things about our game. No horse, with the exception of a rare few of the greats, no horse is really invincible. And I think that Tiz the Law, as you said, has rightfully so gotten a lot of hype, and going from the Holy Bull to the Florida Derby was the plan all along. There weren't any mishaps along the road for him to miss the Fountain of Youth. He was never scheduled to run in that race. So this has, again, always been the plan. And it is kind of fun following him, owned by Saratoga Stable, and being a New York bred, and just kind of seeing the resemblance with Funnyside, and seeing how excited his connections have been along this path. They opted to skip the Breeders' Cup Juvenile with their sights set on the Kentucky Derby. Of course, now with the timing of the Kentucky Derby, their plans kind of change a bit. But again, Florida Derby has always been on the schedule. Now, Barclay Tagg had said to me in the Kentucky Jockey Club that they had planned to stay in Kentucky versus going out to California at that time. It ended up raining. They ended up having to ship, and he didn't end up liking the situation even still. But I still actually thought he ran a good race that day. He ran a huge race in the Holy Bull. I think he really cemented himself there, and it was off of a layoff too, so we now know that he can run fresh. I have no problems with him coming off of a bit of a freshening heading into the Florida Derby. He also can run to his competition. He can sit off the pace. It really looks like this race is kind of made for him. Now he just has to do it.
If there was one other, haven't necessarily touched on every single horse, but if there was one horse in here that's kind of a bit of a long shot that would be able to upset a field like this, what would that one horse be for you, one that could upset a race like this?
Well, I think we've talked about some of the long shots that could potentially upset. I think Ajaweed's going to be happy to go 9 furlongs. I think that Gouverneur Morris has talent and is moving in the right direction. I don't exactly like Candy Tycoon to win, but I wouldn't be completely surprised as he's now kind of, as I said, finally moving in the right direction. But the big three horses are the big three for a reason, and then I think you kind of have those other fringe horses that maybe do have some ability, and I'm kind of looking at the likes of Gouverneur Morris, who, again, I still think has to prove himself, but I think is talented, and even Ajaweed, getting a chance to maybe grab a piece going the 9 furlong distance.
All right, so that is the Florida Derby, again, this Saturday, March 28th. Thank you, Acacia Courtney, for coming on the program today.
You're welcome, Jack, and thanks for being such a big fan of horse racing.
With less than a quarter of a mile to go, Ete Indian with enterprising tactics from the outset, and he's still well clear. Ete Indian and Florent Giroux into the short stretch on top. Long shot Master Day cuts the corner to try to get a slice. Shotsky down the center with As Seen on TV. Inside the final 16th of the phasing Tipton Fountain of Youth, and it's all about Biancone. It's all about Ete Indian, who wins stylishly by 6 or 7.